It's a top, my selector.
Due to some violent content, parental discretion is advised.
I know you gonna dig this.
Happy Saturday, everyone. Happy Saturday. This is Maestro. I'm along here with my brother from Ringside Reporter, Mr. Joe Habib. And as you could see there in the thumbnail, today we're going to talk about neutrality. We're going to talk about the need for boxing in the boxing community. I would actually extend that to the sports community, the arts community, but we're going to keep it at boxing for now. The boxing community, boxing in general, should remain neutral in the conflict in the Ukraine. We should be remain neutral. And we're also going to say, look, the United States should have remained neutral all along. And we're going to make that argument as well as kind of, I would say, disassemble and refute some of the things that have been said about, people like us, including us, who have taken a different stance in the stance that you're going to see in your typical mainstream media narrative. And right before I kick it to you, Joe, I'm going to tell you what this reminds me of and what it's reminded me of for a while. I remember being in elementary school when the United States went into Panama, right? And I'd be at home and my mom, who's Central American, would be telling me, Amilcar, like, this whole thing is wrong. Like, it's bad. It's terrible. I'd hear my mom talking about it with her best friend who's Panamanian and with her other friends. It's terrible. People are going to die over there. The United States shouldn't go in there. This is a terrible situation. And then I'd go on the news and I'd see these pictures of Manuel Noriega yelling at crowds. I'd see pictures or videos of Manuel Noriega with like a ceremonial sword or whatever, riled up speaking to people. And, I'd be scared of Manuel Noriega, and then I'd go to school and everyone would be, talking about how bad a country Panama is and how bad a dictator Manuel Noriega is and how the United States should be there. And then again, I'd go home and I'd hear a totally different thing from my mom and from my mom's best friend who's Panamanian. And it reminds me a lot about that, Joe. And since that time in Panama, it's been a consistent thing. I remember being in beginning of high school and the United States was going into Yugoslavia around the Slobodan Milosevic and the break apart of that country into Bosnia, Slovenia, Serbia, and I'd have Serbian friends who would be telling me this is terrible. United States and NATO countries shouldn't be over there. Then I'd watch on television. It's like I'm getting a totally different thing. Flash forward, now we're in Iraq. Same thing. It's like my life. I've been alive for almost 40 years, right? And it's like the same thing over and over again, going back to elementary school with Panama, and the same thing continues to repeat itself. So, Joe, just give me your overall thoughts on this. I want to thank everybody who's in the chat, by the way. But Joe, give me your initial thoughts on this as an observer, as someone who also believes in neutrality, before we start to get in and bring in videos and different things that we're going to talk about.
Well, history can't be denied, right? I like to use the word empirical data, right? And empirical data is very important in everything, in all facets of life, because you can use that as something to help you learn from your mistakes, right? Or not necessarily myself in this situation, but having that empirical data allows me to look back at situations, right? And how they turned out. So when that similar situation arises, I can formulate a better understanding and opinion of it. And when you look back at history and you've seen every time whether we directly or indirectly have encouraged war in a region with the intent that we're going to make it better. Every time we do that, or at least more often than not, we tend to make it worse. And people are acting like, well, all we're doing is giving them weapons. All we're doing is supporting them. We're not actively in there fighting alongside them. But as you mentioned earlier, and you can correct me if I make any missteps here in my assessment, right? Russia's been mobilizing for months, right? They've been warning for months. United States was well aware of this, as was Ukraine, right? And what we did in the meantime, while this was all going on, was we were encouraging and influencing Ukraine to fight back, to mount a defense. And we're sitting there telling Ukraine, and again, this is maybe a little bit out of context here. It's not word for word what I'm going to say, but we're encouraging them, and we're saying, well, if you go to war with them, or if you don't worry, you defend yourself and we'll back you up, in other words. So that in itself, basically, we wanted this to happen. We could say whatever we want, but to some degree we wanted this to happen because we wanted Russia to be stood up to. We wanted to send that message to Russia that, you know what? We're still a force, and we're going to be a force, and we're going to be standing there watching you right on your doorstep, right? We have an ally right there, right? There's no other way of looking at it. You could sit there and say,
I only have a minute.
You could sit there and say, well, the United States is just trying to let a sovereign nation act freely, and Russia's standing against that. But again, you have to look at half of the country who is not going along with being part of NATO. They still want to be associated with Russia, and not necessarily be associated with Russia, but they don't want to oppose Russia.
They don't want to be antagonistic to Russia.
Exactly. Thank you. So if you're joining a group and an alliance that does that very thing, right, which is taking an aggressive and antagonistic approach towards Russia, then obviously Russia's not going to be happy with that. And I'm hearing, well, Russia just wants to control Ukraine. That's the goal. Well, I don't think that's necessarily true, because Ukraine has been their own country, right, for years now, right? The Soviet Union's been disbanded. So I don't see any evidence of Putin wanting to recreate the Soviet Union. So I don't know how that statement could be valid if there's no evidence to suggest that Putin wants to reassemble the Soviet Union. All he said all along was just be neutral, right?
Well, it's funny you say that, Joe, because we're actually going to show a video in a moment where that particular viewpoint is dispelled by, of all people, a U.S. colonel in the
Correct.
U.S. military. So we're about to show that.
Correct.
But it's very interesting to me that when I engage with this topic and I present facts or I present an argument based on facts, that the response is typically some form of hyperbole, some form of propaganda. So, I mean, I've been called a Putin apologist. You know, I've been accused of not being critical of Putin. I've been accused of agreeing with Putin. So, look, before we go any further, let me just make this clear. Go ahead, Joe, and then I'll make my point.
No, finish your point. And I'm going to go right after. I want you to, because
Right,
what you're saying is important.
Before I make this point, I want to make what I'm saying here very clear. So I'm just queuing up what I'm going to show in a moment. But look, I'm not a fan of Vladimir Putin. Okay, if I was Russian, which I'm not, I wouldn't be voting for Vladimir Putin in Russian elections. His particular views domestically and internationally mostly don't align with my own. Sometimes they do on foreign policy, but definitely not domestic. And even in foreign policy, there are a number of things I don't agree with. All right. So, I mean, if I'm presenting a view of neutrality and then I'm accused of taking a side or of not being critical enough on that side, I just find that to be wholeheartedly like just ridiculous. All right. If I was in Russia, all right, if I was a Russian, I'd probably be voting for Gennady Yezgunov. Who's that, my answer? Well, that's actually one of the leaders of an opposition party. All right. And I'm not going to say which one. I don't want to be demonetized on YouTube, but it starts with a C and it ends with communist. Okay. Gennady Zyuganov. Okay. Who is, by the way, an opponent of Vladimir Putin, whose party is in the Russian Duma with seats opposing Vladimir Putin. Oh, what's the Duma, maestro? Again, if you don't know these things, you really shouldn't be talking to me about the Russia or Ukraine conflict or talking to me about Russia at all. But the Duma is the Russian parliament. All right. Also, if you're going to debate me or talk to me, all right, and you don't know what the Azov Battalion is, by the way, that neo-Nazi group that was called neo-Nazi even as recently as last year by the New York Times, but now has been accepted as a member of the Ukrainian National Guard. Again, if you don't know who the Azov Battalion is, don't talk to me about this conflict. Let me speak my piece and you speak your piece, and then I'll be it. All right. Again, you got to have some humility here, because if all you're getting is CNN, MSNBC, and in many respects, Fox News as well, claptrap propaganda bullshit, I'm not the one to be debating. Okay. If you don't know who Viktor Medvedchuk is, again, why are we having a discussion? Like, I shouldn't really be talking to you. That's the leader of the opposition in the Ukraine, who, by the way, was arrested and put into house arrest and later on escaped, but was arrested and put into house arrest. If you don't know who Viktor Yanukovych is, all right, the leader of the Ukraine, who was opposed with the help of the U.S. in a violent coup, all right, that was presented as a revolution, but it was a violent coup. Again, you probably shouldn't be talking to me about this. You got to have a little bit of humility, okay? Because there's a lot to discuss that happened just before 2 weeks ago. And Joe, I've gone on a little bit of a rant there, so go ahead.
Well, the one disturbing thing to me is these people who call us Putin apologists when we bring up these points. How many times do you have to disavow somebody for people to understand that you're not a supporter of that person? It's almost like it's just a talking point at this point. There's no relevance to it when people say it now, because to me, when people say that, it's the equivalent of being called a hater when you do boxing discussion, because if you don't have an opposing view, or at least a relevant, substantive, intelligent opposing view, then the go-to talking point is, oh, you're just being a Putin apologist. Well, refute what's being said here. Like, we've known how Putin is for years, just like we've known how other dictators are. And
Well, go back to Chechnya, right? I mean, go back in what he's done militarily. But yes, Joe, sorry.
so we've known this, and so at this point, we have to deal with these people. Now, in certain situations, yes, we're going to have to compromise with them. But every time that happens, right, or every time someone from this government talks to someone from that government, oh, you shouldn't be having discussions with dictators. Well, then how are you going to accomplish anything then? How are these conflicts going to get resolved? So, Putin is a guy that we have to deal with one way or the other, right? So by telling a country that is right on their border, who was never an ally, right?
No, I mean Ukraine was not a member of NATO, not an ally with the United States. Under Viktor Yanukovych, I mean they were a neutral country.
Neutral, right? They've always been neutral all these years.
That had good economic terms with Russia, and that was trying to improve its economic relationship with the EU. But what I want to say about the word dictator is this: the word dictator is used very precisely in the United States, and usually it means some form of an authoritarian leader, whether or not he's elected, that the U.S. doesn't like. All right, because funny enough, they never use the word dictator to apply to the very many number of leaders around the world that are not even elected at all. All right, you don't need to look any further than Saudi Arabia, who the United States sucks off nonstop. Okay, for oil. Same with these other countries in the Mideast. All right, same with a lot of leaders in Latin America that were never later labeled as dictators here. I could talk about Augusto Pinochet. I could talk about the leaders of the Brazilian dictatorship. None of them were called dictators here in the U.S. because they were favorable to the U.S. The word dictator applied to Putin is very interesting. You could say he's authoritarian. You could say he's autocratic. But the dude does have a parliament in his country. There are members of the political opposition in his country. He does have to sit elections. There is a constitution in his country. So, I mean, we could go on and on and on. But yeah, I find the use of I've seen it a lot, actually, the use of the word dictator. And that's meant to do one thing. It's meant to propagandize a people to be in favor of conflict. So, and it's very difficult to present an argument in favor of neutrality when one side of that conflict is labeled a dictator. Does that make sense?
It's manipulative at the very least, and it's misleading to some degree.
Yeah.
But again, another evil of the world, and it's just the way of the world. And I know people don't want to hear it's just the way of the world. But whenever a person, place, or thing has leverage, right? They're in a position of power. They use it. So these larger countries, US included, right, tend to have a strong influence on some of the less economically powered, militarily powered countries. It's always been that way, right? We've had the ability to go into countries, right, invade countries that could really not put up much resistance towards us because they didn't have the power to stop us, right? So Russia is the bigger country. So they're being looked at as the bully here. They're being looked at as obviously the aggressor, which they are. But at the end of the day, they are the power in that region. And the reason why we're over there is because we want to try to limit that power, in my opinion, right? We want to be a presence there. We want to militarize that region, right? And obviously they look at that as a threat, as would any nation, right? So at the end of the day, Russia is doing, okay, what a lot of countries would be doing. Now, would everyone be attacking? That's debatable, but everyone would not welcome that. Everyone would take some sort of oppositional stance to what's going on. Any country would do that. I think we can all agree on that.
Well, this is the problem. Unfortunately, a lot of people can't agree with basic facts. Basic fact number one: we operate in a real world. We operate in a world, of geopolitics. Okay, where there are countries and where there are spheres of influence, and where countries do what's in the best interest of their country. Correct. That's the world that we operate in, whether people want to acknowledge that or not. That's the world we operate in. And when you're looking at a conflict like this, number one, there's actually like two conflicts happening at the same time. The first one I'm going to mention, no one ever talks about, which is that there is not a unified Ukraine. So when you hear about the Ukraine and the Ukrainian people, understand that Ukraine has been a divided country since at least 2014. All right, when there was a takedown of that government. Go ahead, Joe.
We hear the term "stand with Ukraine," but are all Ukrainians in Ukraine standing with Ukraine? That's what you have to ask.
If by Ukraine you mean the Ukraine government in Kiev, absolutely not, right? Because there was a coup in that country. Viktor Yanukovych was toppled. After that happened, people in the east, some of the eastern regions of the Ukraine, including Crimea, including Donetsk, including Luhansk, decided that they didn't want to be part of this country that was essentially being controlled by a government that overthrew the people that they were supporting, and a civil war ensued. So for those of you who are in the United States, a country where I am right now, a country that had its own civil war between the North and the South, if you're talking about a unified United States at that time, you're not being intellectually honest. All right. So there was a civil war, and the United States was clearly backing one side of that civil war, right? And Russia, all right, was obviously supporting another side. And that side, of course, was the side of the eastern regions, people that are ethnically Russian. And within that civil war, almost 15,000 people died on that eastern side. Right? Again, no one talks about that. So there's that conflict. And then there's the conflict between Vladimir Putin and the Russian government and the Russian military forces against the half of the side in that civil war, the government in Kiev, who, by the way, right now has aligned itself with neo-Nazis, the Azov Battalion. Again, that's never mentioned. So when Maestro comes on here and says that there are bad people on both sides and then gets labeled a Putin apologist for citing the fact that Ukraine is divided and the government in Kiev is being supported by the Azov Battalion and is supporting the Azov Battalion, a neo-Nazi group, a group that was labeled as such by the New York Times as recently as last year, but now is a member of the National Guard. Oh, you're a Putin apologist. Oh, you're making excuses for Russia. Oh, if you were doing what you're doing here in the United States in Russia, you'd be executed. Excuse me? If you're going to tell me that, where's the evidence for that? Show me the news articles about YouTube content creators in Russia being executed. Show me that. Because I haven't seen it.
Well, would it be safe to say that those are 1945 talking points that are being used in 2022?
It's Red Scare, McCarthyist, I would even label it anti-Russian xenophobic style comments. We're talking about a country, ladies and gentlemen, okay? And this isn't Maestro being a Putin puppet. I'm just laying out facts. All right. The facts are Russia is a country with a deep history, as is the Ukraine. The fact is Russia is a country that's produced, some of the most sophisticated artists in ballet, in orchestra, in chamber music, in music in general, sports, culture. You mentioned chess to me when we were talking off the phone, Joe. I mean, we're talking about a country that's produced all kinds of amazing feats in the technological realms. All right. Some of it good, some of it bad, putting the first satellite into space, right? Launching the first, successful space explorations. That's the good. Creating a nuclear weapon in response to the United States having to do it, well, that can be argued as being good or bad. But I mean, the Sputnik V vaccine came out and was rated as being highly effective despite the propaganda against it here in the West. This isn't me being a Putin puppet or being a Putin apologist. This is me stating fact. The idea that you could say these things about such an important country with a historical, standing in the world, and just say stuff like, "Oh, well, Maestro, if you were saying these kind of things in Russia, you'd be executed." What?
How many Russian people? How many Russian people have the people talked to that are saying that? Where's the evidence for that? And let me just say one thing. And once again, I always defer to you to correct me if I'm wrong here. Is it outlandish to say that the United States had the influence and basically created this whole conflict to some degree because they were the ones that had a strong influence and they were urging and encouraging Ukraine to join NATO and become an ally to help strengthen their position and achieve their goals and to once again, have that power or that presence in that region to kind of keep Russia at bay a little bit, right?
No, you're 100%. Look, we said in the beginning,
we have to be somewhat complicit in this. No,
countries act in their own interest. None of these countries would go and present themselves in an antagonistic way towards Russia, being so close to Russia, being so much smaller than Russia, if they weren't being pushed to do it by a powerful country. I'll let people make that analysis for themselves, but yes.
And can I also say this? Whether we're not good or bad or whatever, some of the smaller countries that are in that region, doesn't it benefit them to have strong ties to Russia so Russia can help them economically, right? So Russia can be a support system to them because they're right there, right? So, and a lot of these people still have strong ties to Russian culture, right? And they still have this, some political beliefs, and they still have the ideology, right?
Well, just as importantly, Joe, they were getting cheap Russian gas and oil.
Correct.
Economic.
So aren't we incorrectly influencing them? And at the end of the day, we're hurting them, and we're going to get into why this benefited us, regardless of the loss of life. And we can try to tie a morality thing to this, right? And the mistreatment, but we can all we have to do is look at Saudi Arabia, because we have no problem staging sporting events over there. We have no problem having entertainment.
You got no problem sending them weapons to butcher innocent people in Yemen. And look, here's another point I got to make, and I see Akon making a version of it in the chat. We oftentimes hear the world is this, the world is that, the world blah blah blah. Does the world include the nearly 1.4 billion people in India? Does the world include the even more than that in China? Does the world include the over 1 billion people living in Africa? Because I'll tell you this right now, when you watch their media, which luckily we're able to do thanks to YouTube, you're getting a totally different picture about all of this. Go to an Indian news station and watch their coverage of this situation. And I'll tell you one thing, it's very different than what you're seeing in the United States, right? Well, I've seen stuff from Brazil, keep it here in America, in South America, that's been critical of this. So let's not act as if it's the world. It's not the world. Western Europe and the United States and Canada are not the world. You can throw in Australia if you want. That's not the world. But look, let's bring up something that you said, because that's a good point, Joe. And it's funny that look, even in our media here in the West, people are noticing what's going on and are talking about it. I'm going to play a source of a friend of the show, Jimmy Dore, who was literally just showing a segment from Fox News. And I'm going to play it, Joe. And whenever you want to comment, just let me know and we'll pause it. Here we go.
And he's going to make a gaffe. And what is the gaffe? He's going to tell the truth.
I'm going to pull
so
it back
this
a
is
little.
Fox Business, and this is a colonel from the United States military, and he's going to make a gaffe. And what is the gaffe? He's going to tell the truth. And this guy doesn't know what to do because he's going to tell them the truth about Ukraine right now. And watch this.
The first 5 days, Russian forces, I think, frankly, were too gentle. They've now corrected that. So I would say another 10 days, this should be completely over. But the question is, what is it that Zelensky is going to do? The Russians have made it very clear what they want is a neutral Ukraine. This could have ended days ago if he accepted that. And then they can adjust.
So there's a colonel from the United States military saying this could have been over a long time ago if Zelensky would have just agreed to keep his country neutral. Won't do it. Here we go.
Borders, but the eastern part of Ukraine is firmly in Russian hands. But again, the Russians are not seizing territory. They're destroying Ukrainian forces. That's their focus.
Colonel, it sounds like you don't approve of Zelensky's stand.
Oh, I think Zelensky is a puppet, and he is putting huge numbers of his own population.
So I want to go and just stop it there myself for one thing, which is that for all of the people that say what Putin is trying to do is control and occupy and turn Ukraine into a part of Russia. I mean, you heard the colonel right there talking about it, and I'll play it back.
And the Russians are not seizing territory. They're destroying Ukrainian forces. That's their focus.
Colonel, it sounds like you don't approve of Zelensky's stand.
Oh, I think Zelensky is a puppet, and he is putting huge numbers of his own population at unnecessary risk. And quite frankly, most of what comes out of Ukraine is debunked as lies within 24 to 48 hours. The notions of taking and retaking airfields, all of this is nonsense. It hasn't happened.
He's not a hero when he's standing up for himself and his own people. You don't think he's a hero?
No, I do not. I don't see anything heroic about the man. And I think the most heroic thing that he can do right now is to come to terms with reality. Neutralize Ukraine. This is not a bad thing. A neutral Ukraine would be good for us as well as for Russia. It would create the buffer that, frankly, both sides want. But he's, I think, being told to hang on and try to drag this out, which is tragic for the people that have to live through this.
I'm inclined to disagree with you, Colonel, but
what can I do? I can't say I agree with you. I'm getting paid.
So there you go. I mean, every now and again, the truth squeezes through the cracks. All right, but I can guarantee you that guy won't be brought back onto that show, that U.S. colonel with that perspective. And again, I'm seeing it in the chat here, a Centurion's son. He said, how is Zelensky a puppet when most people in Ukraine want to be part of Western Europe? Again,
they don't.
Ukraine is a divided country.
50% of them don't want to be part of Western world.
And a lot of the people in the Ukraine, believe it or not, voted for a government that was violently overthrown, Centurion's son, a government that wanted to have good relations with Russia, a government that was acknowledging the fact that there's actually economic benefit in oil and gas and other areas for the Ukraine in regards to being in a positive relationship with Russia and not in an antagonistic one. Yeah. And also, I got to say that even if the latter part of your statement is true, which is that they want to be part of Western Europe, that's still separate than being part of NATO, which is not just making you part of Western Europe. But I mean, NATO's got really nothing to do with, economic trade, of course, other than we're talking about weapons. NATO puts you in an antagonistic spot with regards to Russia. NATO is a military alliance. And believe it or not, Centurion, most countries, again, we're talking about what countries want, right? Most countries want peaceful borders. There's only a handful of countries in the world that have militarized borders. You thinking of North Korea, South Korea, India, Pakistan. Most countries don't want that. Most countries don't want an antagonistic military alliance on their doorstep. Now, you can agree or disagree with Putin's response to that as a politician, as a leader of a country in Russia that has a political constituency that he has to, respond to as well. But what we cannot dispute is the fact that most countries, and unless you want to dispute it, Joe, most countries don't want to have militarized borders.
I agree.
And NATO is a military alliance.
But here's the thing, too. And again, you're just being a Putin apologist. He told Ukraine for months that this could happen. And we knew this as well. But we dismissed it as, he's not. A lot of people said, he's just not going to. He's just bluffing. He's just bluffing. He's just bluffing. Well, he called your bluff. Right?
All right.
And it ended up doing it.
I got to disagree with Centurion on this. You cannot compare Castro's revolution with Bautista with the Orange, quote unquote, revolution, which was a coup against Viktor Yanukovych. And the reason being, Viktor Yanukovych sat through 2 elections, the first of which was contested, the second of which was certified by international observers, including from Western countries. Viktor Yanukovych was unequivocally considered except in segments of the far right Ukrainian society in the West, Viktor Yanukovych was a democratically elected leader. Bautista was a dictator that was not democratically elected and who was, by the way, killing political opponents left and right, something that Yanukovych was not doing. Yanukovych's error in the minds of his violent political opponents was seeking a peaceful relationship and a prosperous economic relationship with Russia. You cannot compare or make that kind of comparison, the kind that you did between Bautista in Cuba and Viktor Yanukovych in the Ukraine. You just can't do that. Those are not the same things. Those are not the same things. And very interestingly to me, Joe, is that the production company that put up the Oliver Stone produced a documentary on that particular issue, the overthrow of Viktor Yanukovych's government, their YouTube video was taken down. Ukraine on Fire, the documentary was taken down. Correct. The documentary that goes deep into what I was just talking about was taken off YouTube. And now you got to watch it on Rumble.
Can Centurion Son explain to me why the United States funneled $200 million for the biological labs in Ukraine? What is the reason behind that? I'm just curious. What is the conclusion about that?
Well, Centurion is saying that NATO is not going to invade Russia, who has nuclear weapons, and start a World War III. Why do they need to expand? Why does NATO need to expand east? Why does NATO need to be?
Then what do they want to do? Then what is the goal?
NATO is a military alliance. Why do they need to be on Russia's borders? Again, I'm just speaking, and this isn't me being a Putin apologist. For those of you who missed the beginning of the show, I've already said that politically I'm aligned with members of the Russian opposition, and I gave the leader of the political party. You guys can go in and look it up. All right. The fact is, though, is that we live in a real world of geopolitics where countries operate according to what is in their best strategic and national defense interests. And I find it very interesting that people cannot see the other side of two sides.
Well, he's saying
that the country would not want a militarized border. They cannot see that. Joe, go.
He's saying that if Ukraine had biological weapons, they would have used them against Russia. Well, they may not have them now, but they could be working on them. Number one. It was a revolution that most Ukrainian people wanted to join the EU. How, like, where are you getting that information? Can you drop some links so and
Well,
prove,
then why
can you
didn't they?
prove that?
Well,
Why-
why didn't they vote for the party that wanted to do that? Then they
Yeah.
voted. They voted for the party that wanted to have an economic relationship with Russia. Then they lost in the election, and then with the backing of a major foreign country, I'm going to let you guess which one, they overthrew that government in a violent revolution, which led to parts of that country wanting to separate, which led to a civil war that started in 2014. But none of this is ever discussed. And if I bring it up, I'm a potent apologist.
Well, we're citing sources, we're playing video, we're reading articles, we're quoting people, and he's just making statements with no evidence. I don't.
Not at all. Well, the evidence will probably be
somebody from United States media, something saying that. But
let's get a super chat because we got one from Ronald Franklin. Good morning to you too, sir. Your super chat is very much appreciated. So look, we shared that video. I also found it very interesting that people have said, "Oh well, Maestro, if you were in Russia, you'd be executed for having a YouTube channel." All right, if you were in Russia, nobody would be able to say all of this stuff. Well, first of all, again, these are just, statements without any kind of factual basis for them at all. Number one, and number two, I like seeing two sides of a story. So I actually used to watch RT America, which is the Russian equivalent of the BBC, right? The Russian equivalent of ABC, of CBC, of it's state media, something that most countries have. CBC obviously being the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, right? So we live in a free society, yet I can't see Jesse Ventura's show anymore. I can't watch Lee Camp give his perspective on this. Their channel was shut down. Why is that?
yeah.
So now really what they're saying is that we only have access to one source of information, one side of a story, which is the U.S. corporate media side of the story, right?
Yeah. Well, if you said anything about I don't even want to use the word because I don't want to get in trouble, but if you said anything about the CV, right? They would take you off YouTube. They would take you off. They would get rid of it. They got rid of your comments. You got suspended. So we are being censored in this country. There's no doubt about it. I mean, there is a certain narrative here, and to sit there and say that anyone can say whatever they want with no repercussions is bullshit, because there's always repercussions to things you say, and the government has a way of censoring us. Media has a way of censoring us. There's plenty of evidence to prove that. All you gotta do is look at all the videos that have been taken down. Look at all the Twitter accounts that have been banned. Look at all the Twitter comments that have been removed. It's obvious.
It's obvious. And to me, Joe, what's also obvious is the very poignant double standard, the hypocrisy. And again, when Maestro's cooking here on my channel, I'm speaking to people all over the world. I'm not just speaking to people that are brainwashed by U.S. propaganda. I see my analytics. I have people watching me in Africa, in Asia, in Europe, right? I'm not going to sit here in my Bronx apartment from the comfort of my desk in front of a webcam, lambasting one side of a conflict for doing things that are one millionth of what the country where I'm living has done in different parts of the world. Oh, well, now you're a Putin apologist because you're bringing up what the United States government did. No.
Pointing out hypocrisy.
I'm pointing out hypocrisy, and I'm pointing out context and how people in the world, not people in Europe, Western Europe, in Australia and Canada and United States, that's one part of the world. People in India are following this. People in Russia are following this. People in China, across Africa, across Latin America. And the perspective on this, let me tell you, just watch their channels, is not what you're seeing on CNN and MSNBC and even on Fox News.
So, to sum it up in a nutshell, all we're saying is this is how the world operates and has operated and will continue to operate whether we like it or not. But we're only picking and choosing when we're going to complain about it, or at least the United States media is going to pick and choose when we can complain about it. And then we're told, oh, well, why are you only, coming out and criticizing this situation, and then you never criticized the other situations when the United States did those things? Well, haven't we been doing that all along? Aren't we criticizing the United States for what they did in Iraq?
So
aren't we criticizing the United States for what they did in Afghanistan? How are we giving the United States a pass here?
Yeah, I
don't understand that argument either.
And for me, it's totally disingenuous to have a discussion about whether Russia should face sanctions, whether Russian athletes like Dmitry Bivol should be banned from fighting for world titles or for world title rankings, when that discussion wasn't taking place, when the Ukraine government was indiscriminately shelling people in the eastern region of that country in a very violent 8-year civil war. So again, I'm providing context. At the end of the day, if you're going to ban Dmitry Bivol, why weren't there any discussions about banning Alexander Usyk from fighting AJ for all those 3 world titles? While the government in Kiev was engaged in armed conflict. And it's interesting to me, when Saddam Hussein was attacking Iraqi Kurds and Iraqi Shia Muslims, right? He was attacking his own people. When al-Assad was fighting people in the eastern parts of his country, right? Many of whom were supported from overseas, by the way, or who were foreign fighters, but he was accused of attacking his own people. But when the Ukraine was doing it for 8 years, no one was saying, oh, the Ukrainian government is attacking its own people. They're killing their own people. They've killed 15,000 people or 14,000 of their own people. Nobody was saying that. Nobody was calling for Ukrainian athletes to face bans. All right. I got an email.
But no, Maestro. These are whataboutisms. No, they're not whataboutisms. They're what-isms. The shit happened. These are what-isms. The shit happened.
Yeah. These aren't whataboutisms or what-isms.
These are what-isms. This shit happened.
I had tickets to see, believe it or not, Maestro tries to do the artistic thing every now and again. And I'd like to support the Lehman Center here in the Bronx. All right. In the North Bronx at Lehman College. Lehman College, they used to have the Siberian National Orchestra. I had tickets to see the Russian National Ballet. I got an email last week telling me that my tickets have been canceled. The show's not happening. I wonder why. Right. So now we're taking it out on artists, on ballet people. I was going to go there with my wife. Right. But it's being banned.
Oh, but people can do whatever they want.
Right.
Really? Why can't people who are ballet dancers do ballet? Why can't they have shows? Why can't Russian entertainers perform? I thought people could do whatever they want. Really?
Yeah.
Tell it to them people.
Virtuoso.
People can do whatever they want if it fits our agenda.
Good morning.
Good morning, Virtuoso. What's good, fam? Happy Saturday.
Happy Saturday to you two guys. When I read up on what the clericals were saying about Bivol getting possibly not sanctioned, for this upcoming fight, I'm like, I see where they're coming from. I think they're coming from a place of trauma, being that they're very close to the conflict. But I have to disagree with those statements. First of all, I think this whole banning of products, of Russian products, all this stuff, all this, I don't know. I don't think none of that really affects how the conflict plays out. And here's why. If you're giving your money to a corporation, I don't think they're liable to fund military operations, if I'm not mistaken. Like just recently, FIFA, 22, the latest game, EA Sports did a software update where they basically delete the whole fucking Russian national team. You hear the banning of Russian products like vodka, and what what you just said about your tickets to a ballet performance, being canceled. I think I don't know. I think they bring this up this new terminology from I've heard it from Aaron Mate. I don't know if you heard of him.
100% Aaron Mate from the Gray Zone. I follow Aaron. I follow Max Blumenthal. I follow the Gray Zone. That's one of the best places to get news until they decide that they should be banned.
Yeah, by the TYT, the gentrification left. Anyway, he basically brought up a term called neo-McCarthyism, and it's like basically this new terminology in describing the latest fear and propaganda machine, forcing people to be afraid of the Russians. Now, I'm pretty certain that there's people on their side that are against the invasion, and I'm with them, But I think we have to look at the historical context of this conflict. That this thing goes way back, as far as like Soviet Russia and basically the treatment of the Ukrainians, and I guess that basically had fomented the nationalism in Ukraine, because it was like a prison, for Russians.
Virtuoso, believe it or not, there's people in Russia that blame the Soviet Union for propping up the Ukraine, because let's not forget that Khrushchev was Ukrainian. Khrushchev, the leader of the Soviet Union, was Ukrainian. Khrushchev, the leader of the Soviet Union during the Cuban Missile Crisis, was Ukrainian. Khrushchev turned Crimea into a part of the Ukraine. There are a lot of people. No, let's not forget, Ukraine also used to have nuclear arms.
Yeah.
Right. Ukraine had a lot of investment in it during the Soviet industrial age.
Yes.
Right? There's a
And
lot
people need to look at basically the founding of NATO. If you want to learn about it, you're not going to like the things that you're going to read. Operation Gladio, that was very real. How basically they had Nazis, scientists and generals basically switch sides to the West, and they were basically the first leaders of NATO. It was all about containing the spread of communism, and it became an eastward expansion. And now that the Soviet Union is so far gone, it's more of a state capitalist government. They basically just move the goalposts and say, oh, now it's about Russian aggression now. Not Soviet, expansion, Russian aggression, because it's just all about the sphere of influence, which, quite frankly, the United States is very much guilty of. Just look at the Americas, and so this is why, like, within our country, we don't hear stuff about the countries that we're sending military arms to are basically just authoritarian regimes. I mean, just look at Saudi Arabia. We don't talk about that quite often enough, and how they're killing, Yemens, and also Israel, which is the height of fucking ignorance and ironic. It's like they're celebrating that they're standing with Ukraine on Palestinian territory, and I'm just dumbfounded.
No,
Like, wow.
It's incredible, because none of these people were standing with the people of the eastern regions of the Ukraine, right?
Yeah.
Donetsk, Luhansk, when they were getting shelled indiscriminately, when there was a brutal civil war taking place. I didn't see wristbands. I didn't see people redoing their Twitter handles to include flags. I didn't see any of this stuff. But now, all of a sudden, we're seeing it. And it's like, yo, what about Israel, Palestine? What about the taking of the Golan Heights in Syria? What about what the UAE and Saudi Arabia are doing in Yemen? I could be doing what about like for the rest of this show. What about the U.S. involved everywhere? Illegal occupation of Guantanamo Bay. That the Cuban government doesn't want that base there, right?
Yeah.
What about the fact that they're still in Iraq? They're still in Afghanistan. They're in Syria, right? They're bombing Somalia. I could go on and on and on with the whatabouts.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm not pointing these things out to be a Putin apologist, but I am able to have some level of self-awareness. I'm here in New York. I'm wearing a New York cap. I'm not going to go on my YouTube channel and start just spitting U.S. propaganda lies to my brothers and sisters around the world that watch me and who are getting a more balanced view of what's going on across the world than what people in this country get. Right? And look, I'm going to play this real quick. Joe, I found it actually on Glenn Greenwald's channel. All right? Not directly off C-SPAN. And I think this is an important video to look at, again, courtesy of Glenn Greenwald. People should check out his reporting. He's very good. This is Victoria Nuland, Undersecretary of State, being questioned in the Senate, which is under oath. And Senator Marco Rubio offers up a softball question that he expects her to knock out of the park with the response of just an absolutely not. Because anyways, let's play it. Here we go. Oops, I'm mute. Get off mute. There we go.
We have a minute left. Let me ask you, does Ukraine have chemical or biological weapons?
So essentially that question was, well, we've been getting a lot of Russian propaganda saying that they found evidence of the Ukraine government having biological weapons. Could you just please say no, that's Russian propaganda? I'm translating the question or interpreting the question. That's how I interpreted it.
Does Ukraine have chemical or biological weapons?
Now, if they didn't, Joe, what should the answer be?
No.
Just no, and just leave it at that. Right now, I'd like you to respond to the response, Joe.
Ukraine has biological research facilities.
Took her quite a while to figure out that response.
Look at her face. You could tell she's uncomfortable even talking about it. She doesn't even want to. She doesn't even want to answer the question. She wishes that she could be in a time machine and they could go back 10 minutes. But no, they can't. But go ahead.
No, and the funny thing is, for those of you who are around the world, not just for those of you who are sitting in New York City or in the Boston area like Joe, Virtuoso, where are you from again? I forgot.
Same city as you are, man. New York.
Oh, New York. There you go. Of course. Sorry, brother. So we're in New York. We're in the Northeast here. It's not like we don't remember that this very thing was used as a context to go not to your next door neighbor, but all the way around the world to Iraq. This very thing that, by the way, later on, there was no evidence ever existed or existed in Iraq at the time when Iraq was being accused of it. No evidence at all. This very thing, not your next door neighbor, but halfway around the world, got us involved in a conflict that cost this government and these taxpayers over here, what, about $1 trillion, Joe, is the estimates? Close to, maybe more. Right, so here we go. Very simple question, which should have just been a no, struggles to answer it.
Biological weapons.
Ukraine has biological research facilities.
Now, Joe, what does that mean? And Virtuoso, let's go to Joe and then Virtuoso. What does that mean?
I mean, there's strong implications that they're trying to develop biological weapons to use against the Russians, in my opinion.
And if you were a Russian citizen on the other side of the border, how do you interpret that, Virtuoso?
I would probably interpret that as like really nervousness from her part, like to really answer the question. I think she didn't really like answer it directly. I think she wanted to be she became more of a euphemistic, if you ask me.
Which, in fact, we are now quite concerned Russian forces may be seeking to gain control of. So
Charlie G says, most countries have biolabs. What world do you all live in? Well, there are biolabs, and then there's biolabs that you're afraid are going to get under the control of another country. Well, why the concern that Russian forces are going to take control of these biolabs?
Because they're going to find out that weapons are being created there. That's why.
Thank you very much. I mean, it's what world are you living in, Jesus?
What world are you living in if you don't think that countries don't have biological weapons and they don't try to develop biological weapons?
we are working with the Ukrainians on how they can prevent any of those research materials from falling into the hands of Russian forces should they approach.
I'm sure you're aware that the Russian propaganda groups are already putting out there all kinds of information about how they've uncovered a plot by the Ukrainians to release biological weapons in the country and with NATO's coordination. If there's a biological or chemical weapon incident or attack inside of Ukraine, is there any doubt in your mind that 100% it would be the Russians that would be behind it?
So again, these are just regular biolabs, but if the Russians take control of these biolabs and use the innocent stuff that they found in the biolabs as weapons, it's going to be 100% Russia's fault, and like they're already preempting us for some kind of
There is no
situation.
doubt in my mind, Senator, and it is classic Russian technique to blame on the other guy what they're planning to do themselves.
Well, I only have a minute left.
So there you go, guys.
Little projection there, no?
I'd say so.
Isn't that what maybe United States and Ukraine are doing?
Bio research is for all sorts of things.
Okay.
Well, yes, that's true, but not bio research that you're worried about getting into other hands and being used as a weapon. So again, Charlie G, I don't know.
$200 million. Why would you need $200 million for standard bio research? $200 million is a lot of money. How'd that biolab in Wuhan work out?
I know, bro. It's
I think my big theory is legit.
Yeah. So, I want to go to this now, because unfortunately, the only time, and I'm saying this as someone who was highly critical of Fox News and still am, but the only time I see stuff, the truth fall through the cracks just a little bit. It's like when you're in an apartment and that, neighbor on top of you's got like a little issue in the kitchen or in their bathroom, and then like a little bit seeps through the bottom, right? The only time I see that seepage of the truth is on Fox News, believe it or not. In terms of the mainstream media. Joe, go.
And can I add one thing?
Yeah.
Is it really that coincidental that we're funding that lab on a country that borders a non-ally of ours, right? We're not, there's no information of us, funding Canada to do biolab research, right? We don't do that. I haven't heard of any stories of us doing that with Mexico, right? Am I wrong? I mean, I could be wrong, but I haven't heard of it, right?
No, you're not wrong.
So is it coincidental that we're helping them do bio research and giving them $200 million while they're bordering a country that is a non-ally of ours?
A country that you're hostile to, actually.
Hostile, yeah.
So look, as I said, here's a little bit more seepage.
Is that coincidental though? I mean, I don't know.
Here's a little more seepage courtesy of Fox News and Tucker Carlson.
So I guess the first and most obvious question is, this is kind of a blockbuster story. I have no idea what it means or where it goes, but it's clearly a case where the U.S. government has been lying, has mounted a disinformation campaign, if you will, designed to cover up what it's doing. And nobody in the press corps seems interested in finding out what's at the bottom of this. Why is that?
Right. So first of all, like you, I've heard the Russian and Chinese accusations for weeks that the United States is partnering with Ukraine to have biolabs right on the other side of the Russian border, and never talked about it because there was never any evidence for it. I don't take the word of the Russians or the Chinese for it. What made me get interested in the story was when Victoria Nuland went before the Senate and Marco Rubio asked her, are there biological and chemical weapons programs in Ukraine, expecting her, even said, I only have a minute, her to say no, of course not, so he could then claim it was debunked. But she didn't say no. In fact, she acknowledged exactly what you just went through, that not only are there labs, but they're so dangerous, whatever's in them, that they're deeply concerned it would fall into Russian hands. The other point is, any journalist who comes on the air and says that they can claim, that they can state that these concerns are false or a byproduct of disinformation, like journalists have been doing for weeks under the guise of fact-checking, is not telling the truth. All they know is that the Pentagon denies it, the CIA tells them it's not true, and then they equate that, they conflate that with proven fact, which is the number one problem in journalism that we're seeing very pervasively in this war.
It's so shameful that anybody employed as a reporter would do something like that without doing any actual reporting whatsoever, even bothering to learn about the subject, and then to scold anyone for asking legitimate questions. So here's the problem that I have with it. Government does things that are secret. We don't always know what they are. Maybe in some cases that's legitimate. But to attack anyone American citizens who ask honest questions as tools of Russia seems to me so far out of bounds. I'm worried this is being established as a precedent.
Well, as we know, this has been going on for 5 or 6 years, that anybody who questions the predominant mainstream narrative from the media, from the Democratic Party, are tools of Vladimir Putin, are Kremlin agents, are sympathizers for Moscow. This has been their tactic forever, and obviously it's escalated now.
Sound familiar, Joe?
I thought the word apologist. Yeah.
Right?
But the one point I want to make, Tucker, is when the government comes out and emphatically denies that they have biological weapons, we know they're not telling the truth. Remember the anthrax attacks right after 9/11? They were incredibly terrifying because of how weaponized they were. First, the government said it was from Al-Qaeda. Then they said it was from Saddam Hussein. In 2008, they said, we solved the case. Actually, it came from a U.S. Army lab, from an infectious disease specialist under the auspices of Tony Fauci, a scientist who cultivated these weaponized strains of anthrax and deployed them on U.S. soil. We know they did the same thing with the coronavirus, where they manipulated the coronavirus to become more lethal and more contagious. They claim that those aren't biological weapons because inside their brain, their intention is not to use them, but just to study them. But the things they're making are exactly the same as what you would make if you were to make biological weapons. And you have to be so careful to understand what they mean when they deny that they have these.
Well, the last question, maybe you don't know the answer, but why Ukraine? You know, of all the countries you would conduct this kind of research in, you would pick one with like a solid medical infrastructure. You'd pick Germany or Israel or someplace with, you know, first-class scientific research going on. You would not pick Ukraine. Why Ukraine?
Unless you viewed Russia as your primary threat, unless you wanted to be provocative toward the Russians, unless you wanted to be in Ukraine developing all sorts of weapons, as we clearly have been. We've been flooding that country with lethal arms for 5 or 6 years. So clearly there's an intention for the United States to be heavily involved in Ukraine. The Russians say their motive is to be threatening and provocative. The United States denies that, but they have their tentacles in Ukraine and have for many years all the time, which is a critical part of the narrative that has been lacking.
That's right. It's fair to ask, what have they been doing in Ukraine? Why are all their kids working for Ukrainian companies? What is going on here? Glenn Greenwald, I appreciate you coming on tonight. Thank you.
Any thoughts? Joe, and then Virtuoso.
Well, again, to not even be suspicious, and if you are suspicious, to be attacked and criticized and called an apologist and a conspiracy theorist, I think suspicion is totally warranted here, in my opinion. And I believe that whether or not they're going to admit to it or not, what is being worked on in there, and what is could or could not be created in those labs, nevertheless can be lethal, as Mr. Greenwald alluded to. So, who was the coronavirus meant to be a weapon? I don't know. I don't know, but it was still dangerous. It was still dangerous one way or the other. So when you're doing things in a lab that are dangerous and you don't want no one to know about it, right? Then again, I'm going to always be skeptical of that.
Yeah, this is alarming, really. I can see why people are calling Russia invading Ukraine as like their Iraq war invasion, like the biological weapons that they have that we must prevent them from using. But it needs this is the thing that warrants, I say, a UN like inspection, in my opinion, like to bring in a neutral body, quote unquote, to at least investigate if there are biological weapons in Ukraine before we jump to conclusions and see if they're really going to attack, Russia.
So here's another thing to talk about here, right? Whether or not, like, what the intention is, right? Again, by not having someone go in there and check it out, something bad could happen. Like another coronavirus could be created in that lab.
Right.
So that's a concern of mine. Whether or not, what the intentions are, I can't say with 100% certainty what the intentions are, but I do have my suspicions. But
let me ask you this. Do you have 100% certainty that if you were in Russia on the other side of that border and you were seeing this, that you would be concerned?
I'd be concerned one way or the other because, again, anything that's created in that lab with one misstep not even with the misstep, generally anything that's created in that lab has the potential to be very dangerous and harmful to people, in my opinion.
100%. And again, if I bring up the fact that Ukraine was in a civil war, if I bring up the fact that nearly 15,000 people died in those eastern regions, those regions that were antagonistic towards the government, they didn't want to be part of it because there was a coup in that country that overthrew a democratically elected leader, Viktor Yanukovych. All right. So just to put that in a U.S. context for you, it would be like an election takes place in the United States. People contest that election. They then do it another time. And a guy wins. And that guy was supported heavily by Texas and California. And then Texas and California, like, well, now you've overthrown the guy that we elected, the guy that was doing things that were supporting Texas and California. This isn't a democratic country. We're leaving. And then for 8 years, Washington, D.C. decides to bomb and shell Texas and California. That's what's been going on in the Ukraine for the last 8 years. Okay? Except the difference is that in this case, the case that I gave you, there wasn't a foreign power supporting that country, that overthrow, supporting the new government and sending them weapons and filling that country with weapons. Now, if again, me looking at two sides of a story is not me being a Putin apologist. That's me using my brain and looking at two sides of things so I can make my own conclusion. Last point, Joe, and then right to you. So what do we have in the meantime? We've got a civil war. We've got neo-Nazis. We've got a biolab. And apparently people are unable to see the Russian perspective of this. And if you just even look at the Russian perspective, you're a Putin apologist.
And forgive me if I may sound ignorant here, and I always, defer to you for correction, but is this similar to the gain of function research over in China? Can this be a comparable incident? Because last time we funded someone to do this, it didn't work out too well for us. But
I would really suggest that people check out the work of Richard Medhurst, because he the other day had an expert in this field on talking. It was a long live. Unfortunately, when you go to his channel and watch the lives, you can only see the live, and then after you just get snippets of the show. But he had a journalist on. Her name is Natalia Gaitskansheva, who's been following this story for years. I'll put up a little portion of it so you guys can see, because he did release a snippet of it, Richard Medhurst, and you guys can have a quick watch and a listen.
In addition to this,
please
run it back.
Diliana, you posted on Twitter that the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine, they deleted from their website all these documents about 11 Pentagon-funded biolaboratories in Ukraine. I've read your work, and I know you've covered this topic a lot. You've been on the ground reporting on it. Could you maybe tell us a bit more about these biolaboratories? What are they doing there?
the United States has funded at least 11 biolaboratories in Ukraine over the last years. And in addition to these 11 biolaboratories, the Pentagon has contracted American private company to rebuild and equip 2 new biolaboratories in Ukraine's capital, Kiev, and in Odessa. The end date of this contract is 2023. What is the purpose of the Pentagon funding such military program in Ukraine? Not only in Ukraine. The Pentagon has funded biolaboratories in 25 countries around the world, and the Pentagon has been operating such biolaboratories in 25 countries around the world. The sum that has been allocated so far is $2.5 billion. Why would the Pentagon spend or the US government spend $2.5 billion on the health of foreign citizens instead of on the health of its own citizens? This is a question that makes no sense. I have been investigating this topic for a long time, and I received documents from insiders, and these documents expose that or reveal that the United States has performed biological experiments on allied forces in Ukraine and in Georgia, the Republic of Georgia. In the documents about all these projects, it is written, all volunteer deaths will be promptly reported. There is no information as to what military practices would be performed that would lead to such deaths, but it is clearly stated, all volunteer deaths will be promptly reported.
I'm going to put the link to that in the chat, Joe, so people can watch it. It's a very good interview where she goes into at length the very specific types of research happening at those facilities. And let's just say this, they weren't peaceful, you know, they weren't, I mean, I can't understand how such dangerous activity could be presented in any kind of positive light at all. After you listen to her great reporting and the interview conducted by Richard Medhurst. Great channel, by the way, Richard Medhurst. I saw Boxing Dev pop in. Boxing Dev, if you want to come back, come back. I mean, it's open for you. Any thoughts on that, Joe? I mean, I put that up because of the people like, well, you know, every country does biological research, you know. Every country has biological research being funded to the tune of over $2 billion, I guess, by the Pentagon, right? I mean, I don't get it. Boxing Dev, thank you for joining us. Good to see you. Saludos, buenos dias.
Thank you so much for the invite. It's always a pleasure to be here. Muchas gracias. Saludos desde Argentina.
No, mi placer, mi placer. Gracias a ti. Well, what are your thoughts?
I think it's a really good topic for a talk maybe, but I need to investigate a little bit about this topic because I wasn't I don't know a lot about this, but I think it's a really interesting topic.
Well, there you go. Thank you, Boxing Dev. So join in on the discussion here with us. Virtuoso, do you have any thoughts after seeing, you know, Glenn Greenwald talking about this with Tucker Carlson, after seeing Delania Gatskeva talking about it with Richard Medhurst on his channel?
All I can say is reporters, you know, need to protect their sources, you know, from these certain dangers, you know, because the reporters right there, like Greenwald and this lady you showed me, they're putting their life and their reputation on the line, because this is really a controversial topic, because the official narrative, quote unquote, is like really driven by corporate news interests. I see, like, when I see this current, you know, theater of war, it's just like a flavor of the month country that is experiencing, you know, military aggression, but they have, you know, his historical context, and people need to study up on that. I don't think people should just focus their attention on just Ukraine. I mean, there's other injustices around the world, like I just mentioned, Yemen. Yemen is under a lot of is one of the worst human atrocities. You know, it's like just human rights atrocities, basically. And Palestine is still fighting for its freedom. But
absolutely,
nobody wants to talk about that anymore. Because like, remember we were just talking about Joe Rogan and his issues with bringing all these quack doctors on his podcast and all this stuff. You know, there's all this COVID controversy still going around, and then just like some Pavlovian effect, bam, we're talking about Ukraine and and the Russian invasion and all that stuff, and people are just already foaming at the mouth, wanted to talk about this issue, but not enough information it has been processed, you know, that could lead them to have at least a functional argument about why this invasion happened in the first place. So it's
I mean, according to the mainstream media, it literally just popped out of like thin air last 2 weeks ago because Putin wants to control the Ukraine and have a Russian empire and take the land. And I'll throw in another one for you: the Western Sahrawis in Western Sahara, who have been living under Moroccan occupation since Spain gave up that as a colonial territory. People need to look into their struggle. You've got indigenous peoples all up and down our continent here, struggling. You look at the ones in Brazil as an example. They were pushed from the coast to the Amazon. And now that they're in the Amazon, they're being pushed out of there by the Brazilian agricultural sector, which apparently needs to continuously chop down, one of the, last things in this planet, the Amazon rainforest, that is saving us from imminent doom in terms of the CO2 that it absorbs and the oxygen that it pumps out. I mean, I could go on and on and on and on about oppressed peoples that no one talks about, but that, have become we got Ukrainians being the forefront of the news and the example of violence being set upon peoples in this world. And it's like you said, there's a lot of things going on in the world. But here's the last thing I want to play by Richard Medhurst, and it's on what is now allowed and not allowed as speech here. I thought this was very interesting. You guys have a look.
Allowing people like Lindsey Graham, but also everyone now, to call for violence against Russians. Take a look at this story over here, this breaking news story. This is from Reuters. Facebook temporarily allows posts on Ukraine war calling for violence against invading Russians or Putin's death. It's not a joke. So down here they say Meta platforms, so Facebook and Instagram, will allow users in some countries to call for violence against Russians and Russian soldiers in the context of the Ukraine invasion, according to internal emails seen by Reuters on Thursday, in a temporary change to its hate speech policy. The social media company is also temporarily allowing some posts that call for death to Russian President Vladimir Putin or Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko in countries including Russia, Ukraine, and Poland, according to internal emails. Quote, as a result of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we have temporarily made allowances for forms of political expression that would normally violate our rules, like violent speech, such as death to the Russian invaders. We still won't allow credible calls for violence against Russian civilians, a Meta spokesperson said in a statement. The calls for the leader's death, so meaning Putin or Lukashenko, will be allowed unless they contain other targets or have two indicators of credibility, such as the location or method, one email said. And the temporary policy changes on calls for violence to Russian soldiers apply to Armenia, Azerbaijan, Estonia, Georgia, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, Russia, Slovakia, and Ukraine. So basically,
I'm going to go ahead on this a little bit because it gets into, if I get the timestamp right, it might have actually been another video. Actually, it was another video where they were talking about how you're actually allowed right now to be supportive of the Azov Battalion now, a neo-Nazi group, because they're fighting Putin. So apparently now you're allowed to call for violence on these platforms, and that's been banned on these platforms. And you're also allowed to, believe it or not, support the Azov Battalion. I'll look for that in a moment. But what I want to do before I do that is turn to a video that Joe actually brought to my attention today. and it's on kind of the reasons why the United States has entered this conflict and kind of the repercussions of it. Joe, thank you for sending me this, and I think people will find it very interesting as well. And like I said, all of the seepage of the truth, for whatever reason, seems to be happening under through Fox News, and it's probably because Biden is president. That would be my guess. So, but that doesn't mean that a lot of the things that they're saying have not been true. But check this out.
It's been a rough few years, a pandemic, snap recession, now an inflation crisis. In times like this, we need somebody looking out for us, putting our interests first. That man isn't around, so who could we turn to? Well, it's certainly not Washington, D.C. Comedian Dennis Miller once said that Washington, D.C. is to lying what Wisconsin is to cheese. And he's not wrong. And the main thing Washington lies about is money. They'll beg, borrow, or steal to help themselves, using any inside information they can, while you're a day late and $1 short. And the war in Ukraine is no different. Vladimir Putin was building up troops along the Ukraine border for months. Washington knew it. Biden knew it. There were briefings. The satellite images got passed around Congress. The sanctions talk was swirling.
I've made it absolutely clear to President Putin, it's the last thing I'll say, that if he moves on Ukraine, the economic consequences for his economy are going to be devastating. Devastating.
This invasion was brewing for months, and Washington was assembling the economic sanctions packages behind closed doors. They knew this would impact the global economy and you directly. So you would figure that Congress, elected to represent our interests, would do something ahead of time to warn us and protect us against what was coming. Guard Americans from the economic turmoil. Maybe they'd take early action to cushion us from economic warfare, get ahead of the energy crisis, brace us for the commodity spikes, and warn us about the supply chain fallout. Sounds reasonable, right? Well, it's not how DC works. Instead, it looks like Congress saw this as a gold rush. They knew what sanctions could be coming down, and all they had, dollar signs in their eyes. Members from both sides of the political aisle poured money into the market, buying up defense stocks, energy stocks. So as Ukraine burned to the ground, Congress got rich. It starts with Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the former chair of the Democrat Party. In late January, more than a month before the invasion, Wasserman Schultz purchased up to $45,000 worth of Patterson UTI energy stock. What do? The company drills for oil and gas. Drill, Debbie, drill. And it's shot through the roof since then, jumping nearly 60% in value since she bought it. She sits on the Energy and National Security subcommittees, too, is buying up energy stocks, while national security situation here is looming. She didn't buy any windmill stock. That's so weird. Fun.
So he goes on, Joe, as you know, to essentially show how a number of politicians with inside information, because they sit on committees and were part of the plan to sanction Russia and enact these kind of economic policies, have gone on to benefit tremendously through investments in the oil and gas sector. Joe, what are your thoughts on it?
Well, we've heard this time and time again that war is profitable, correct? And these sanctions, we've talked about this before, that they don't hurt the governments. They actually help the governments, right? Russia's not being hurt here, right? Russia's not being hurt here at all, because they're selling the oil around the world now, and more. Now people are buying up that oil in like it's going out of style, right? So they're not losing. But what the people who are losing are the working class people like yourself and me, because we're the ones that have to pay the higher prices, right? these government people who are very wealthy, who are invested in stocks, right? They were invested in stocks, whether it be from oil, gas, weaponry, right? They're making tons of money off this, and I'm sure Putin himself is making tons of money off this, and people in the Russian government are making tons of money on this. The only people you're hurting are the working class people, who aren't the ones. Many of us, don't have an interest in this. We have an interest in this, but the majority of people don't even really know what's going on, right? And they're being punished for something that they don't understand. So it's very unfortunate.
No, you're right. And then the people that people want to punish are regular Russian people like this man right here, right?
Скажи то, что я был в Узбекистане в это время, когда все началось. Конечно же, я переживаю за эту ситуацию, потому что у меня много друзей из Украины. У нас человек в команде из Украины, да, то есть у меня много друзей вообще в Европе и в Америке. Я им желаю только всего самого лучшего и мира. И хочу скорее, чтобы все вернулось.
I was training, beginning of my training, I was in Uzbekistan in the mountains, and I was doing my conditioning training over there, and when all this started. And of course, this affected me somewhat in some way, because I have a lot of friends in the Ukraine. I have a lot of friends and relatives in Russia. I have, there's people that work on our team that are from the Ukraine. And the only thing I wish for is for everything to go back to normal and for everybody to be in peace. I mean, that's what's important, and I hope that happens in the near future.
I mean, Joe, does that sound like a guy that should have his livelihood taken away from him?
Doesn't sound like a guy to me who's in favor of any hostile movement or any. He's not supporting the war. He's taking a neutral stance, which is something that we should have done.
Right. And I mean, back to that original colonel who was asked whether he thinks Zelensky is a hero. I mean, how is it a hero to send somebody into an armed conflict that they have no chance of winning? That's not heroic. I mean, it's like setting up. I was making this comparison to you yesterday over the phone to keep it boxing, but it would be like, sending Chocolatito in to take on Tyson Fury.
Yeah.
I mean, is that heroic? I mean, obviously this is a much more serious thing than that, but look, it's not heroic to send people into a military confrontation that is not going to do anything other than lead to deaths and destruction. Ukraine is not winning any military battle with the United States, regardless of how much support the United States gives. And taking it out on guys like Bivol or the Russian ballet that got canceled here in New York City, again, you're not. This is nothing beneficial. Same with sanctions. Sanctions never hurt the ruling class. They hurt the working class. They always have, they always will. Go for it, Virtuoso.
Yeah, we need to look at this. What Bevo is trying to say, that he doesn't support the invasion. He's pretty much neutral on this, and we need to look at him as just a sportsman, not a government official. At the end of the day, it is just consumer product. Boxing is a consumer product. No matter how unethical it is, it's a consumer product. It has nothing to do with politics. It doesn't, like, again, I mentioned this about the video game FIFA and how they deleted the fucking Russian team. On top of that, right, PlayStation basically put out a statement that in solidarity with the Ukraine, they're shutting down their web services for PlayStation users in Russia. And it's like only and another and all and also this, right? Sorry for stuttering. OnlyFans, right? You have sex workers in Russia who rely on OnlyFans. They don't have access to their funds. So you also have like tech oligarchs basically in control here, basically saying you don't have any access to these services, and you're under economic sanctions, right? You're cut off from the rest of the world. And now, what the fuck are you going to rely on? You know what I mean? It's crazy.
100%. So yeah, look, Virtuoso, I want to thank you for coming on, bro. We're about to wrap up over here, but your insights have been great, and please come back again soon.
All right, man. Peace out, man. Thank you.
Thank you, Virtuoso. Virtuoso being right here from New York City as well. And look, guys, I'm gonna put some sources in the chat that I think people should pay attention to. The main one being the Gray Zone. All right, check out their YouTube channel, check out their reporting. I kept as much as I could today the videos to U.S. based people. All right, and to U.S. sources, because I know what the reaction is going to be if I post RT stuff, even though RT has been pretty much taken down in Europe and even here in the United States. So, that's why the videos were like Fox News and other videos of we focus a lot on Fox News and the seepage of the truth on that network. But yeah, I mean, our whole thing here with this show, Sucker Punch, is like they keep throwing sucker punches at us, the mainstream media, and at some point it's like people got to open up their eyes and not be afraid to question things, and also not being afraid to be labeled, Putin apologist. You're apologizing for Putin, you're justifying Putin. No, we're providing context and analysis and engaging in question and answer and an investigation should be actually something that we should all do. I don't know why is that problematic, Joe? I mean, there's freedom of speech. Apparently there's freedom of association. I mean, here in the United States, not necessarily in Australia, Canada, and Western Europe, but we should at least be able to. I'm not doing anything hateful or hate speech, or I'm just asking questions. And I'm trying to look at two sides of a conflict. I don't believe in Putin bad, Ukraine good, me no like Putin, me want send weapons to Ukraine, or me want sanctions on Russia. I mean, my level of analysis and discussion goes a little bit further and more and deeper than that, Joe.
Yeah, I think it's okay to ask questions, and I think there are a lot of questions that aren't being answered right now, and we're having to find out this information ourselves by other independent thinkers who are providing this to us. And people who are critical of this, they're going to label it as propaganda. But once again, how do you refute it? Just like when Rubio asked that young lady the question, she didn't refute
Victoria
it.
Nuland, she's not that young, but yeah, Victoria Nuland.
Trying to show her a little bit of respect.
She's the Undersecretary of State, so she's second in command of the U.S. State Department, which runs foreign relations for the U.S. government.
So
softball question. I only got a minute left. Can you just please say that there's no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and that's Russian propaganda? And she couldn't do it.
And then the counter argument is going to be, well, okay, well, it's just research. How do you know they're creating weapons? Well, why? Again, the response to that is going to be, why are they so concerned if it's just regular research? Why are they so concerned that it's going to fall into Russian hands? And why would Russia try to take that over? I mean, why not? If they wanted have the UN inspectors or go in there, then why would that be a problem? Who knows? And what is the benefit for us to fund Ukraine, someone all the way across the globe, with $200 million? Like, why are we doing that? What is the reason behind it? Why Ukraine?
Yeah, I mean, it's the answer to that. If you're looking at it, it should be. I mean, because they're on Russia's doorstep. But it is what it is. So, any last words, Joe, before we jump up out of here?
No, I think this was a good show. Really,
thank you, Joe. I agree, and I want to thank everyone that was here: Punch Smollett, Grievous, Ronald Finkley, Centurion Son, Virtuoso, who joined us, Boxing Dev, who joined us, Reese Mack, Thomas Fredericks, SV, Tashi Sangpo was here with us, Centurion Son. Thank you for those questions and comments. George H as well. Ratty, thank you too. And everyone else, JC, KRLB, anyone else who was here that I missed. I know there was a lot of you here, so thank you so much for being part of the show. Akon, KDDR 7989. I mean, I'm looking at the ones who really dropped a lot of comments here. David Day, okay. He had a great comment. He said, this boxing channel is the best source of news. Well, just trying to compile stuff and give our thoughts. So that's that, man. It's going to be it for Sucker Punch today. Thank you, guys, and take care. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday.